of Stevens Point Board of Water and Sewerage Commissioners meeting, recorded March 10, 2025.
To the computer, it is noon, so we can begin. Roll call will be taken as usual. And we have to approve the minutes of the February 11th meeting. Are there any questions, additions, corrections?
I didn't see any. Have none. Move to approve. I'll second.
All those in favor signify by the sign of aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. So repeat for me again why there's two sets of claims for each department?
Water wasn't included last month.
Okay. Thank you. So we'll look at both sets of claims for the water department, both March 10th and February 11th. Any questions? Comments? If not, we'll go on to the sewage department. March 10th. Questions?
Nothing on sewage, but I didn't realize we jumped into the March water. I just had a question on 59891 on the Neptune radios. What does that involve, the Neptune radio?
So the radios that we attach to our meters, these happen to be an older generation where they have run their lifespan and are retired, and they were sitting on our shelves. So because they have batteries in them and other things that need recycling, you can't just dispose of them. So we had to take, it was quite a few. It was maybe a couple, almost like a pallet worth of radios to Express Recycling to have them recycling those radios for our old technology.
Okay, I thought, I was wondering, Neptune is a brand name then?
Neptune is the type of meter and radio that we had used for a long time before switching primarily to Metron meters.
Yeah.
Thanks much.
On the other side.
And nothing on
No, we're
sewage.
gonna dry.
No questions on sewage? No. All right, on to stormwater. Any questions there? No. And finally, we'll look at fiber. Which is pretty simple. So now we need a motion for all the claims as presented.
So moved.
I'll second.
All those in favor signify by the sign of aye.
Aye.
All same sign. Motion carried. All right. Now we're on to the water supply and distribution report.
Eric isn't here today, but the reports are attached. If you have any questions, I can field those.
Do we have any reason for, or that we know of, for the decline in pumpage?
You just talking this decline here? I think,
Yeah.
I think more than anything, we saw a pretty high year last year. You know, the 200,000, which is actually 200 million, was a little unusual last year. We're pretty in line with 23 and 22, so I think this is probably more routine.
Okay, thanks.
Last year was a leap year too.
Yeah, those leap years.
Yeah, that extra day.
Any other questions about water supply? All right, let's go on to the sewage treatment operations report.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. We did make all of our permit limits for the month of February. You can see on February 1st, if you look at the final effluent discharge, go over two more columns to the right. Right there, there's a 41.34 on our final effluent, and then our raw influent was 528. We actually had somebody dump something to us that we were never able to track down. I do not know where it came from. But that gave us a pretty good plant upset for majority of the month. So if you look at our phosphorus data, when we start looking at it, you'll notice that our phosphorus numbers were a little higher for this month. That's why, because we did have a slight upset in the system that we fought pretty much the whole month. Everything's back to normal now. We were able to stay within all of our permit limits. But that was kind of the big news coming out of February from across the street.
Well, Chris, when you say somebody dumped something, what would be your best guess? And I know it's a huge guess.
I have called everywhere. That would have been my best guess. Anybody who has the ability to send us enough BOD, enough carbon in the water to cause something like that, and I came up empty. So I checked all of our normal trucked in stuff, and none of our trucked in stuff was high. Talked to the breweries in town, talked to the distillery in town. I don't know.
Okay.
Unfortunately, that's the best answer I have at this moment. Luckily, it was a one-time deal. Hopefully it stays that way and it doesn't pop back up, but
Thanks for doing your detective work.
I'm sure it will probably pop up again at some point, and at that point, maybe we can catch it then. Then we have actually starting today, our UV disinfection project is just getting underway to replace our UV disinfection system. That's on track to be done by May 1st and have it back operational before we need to start disinfecting.
For UV disinfection to be effective, do the suspended solids have to be below a certain level, or do you just,
The higher the suspended solids, as well as any color in the water. So if we take in a lot of landfill leachate that has a lot of tannins in it, things that stain the water, all that stuff will actually absorb the UV light. So you need more bulbs, more power out of your bulbs to get your kill in order to disinfect.
for parts of the time, if the effluent is real clear, doesn't have much in suspended solids, is the UV plant oversized for what it would?
Yeah, the UV system is designed for worst case scenario.
Okay.
Because we have to be able to disinfect to meet our fecal coliform limit and our upcoming E. coli limit. We've got to be able to meet that at all times.
Okay.
So no matter what our effluent looks like, we have to be able to meet that.
So at some times, we'll be putting out much
Very low numbers. We'll be putting out very low numbers. And sometimes it's not as low, but yeah, normally it's pretty good. So. And that is all I have for today. If you guys have any questions, I would be happy.
You don't have to say the whole way, but just.
You say how long we can.
Dean, did you have a question?
I figured he didn't know he wasn't muted, so I just muted him real quick.
Okay. Now we need to talk about the sewer credit for 1430 Torun Road.
Yeah, so, let's see, I was on the other one, sorry. Let me go back here. So the memo written up here, and I'll jump ahead to the graphic. During our last meter read cycle, it became really obvious that there was a problem here. We called the property and alerted them and did a little back and forth. And the nice thing here is that this data is very, very clear. On this date, they clearly had a break, and on this date, they clearly fixed it. So the volume of water that's in this higher part here all leaked into the ground, and there wasn't any sewer involved. So after the repair, we were in contact, or actually about this time we were in contact, but since it was repaired, a sewer credit request is appropriate. And this is what I'm able to support from a request perspective, based on what didn't get to the treatment plant. So it's a pretty straightforward one, albeit rather large, but that water didn't make it to the treatment plant. So about 312,000 cubic feet of water.
Is there a motion to approve the recommendation to apply the credit?
I'll move to approve.
I do have one question, but I'll second the
Okay,
motion.
good.
And did this seem like, the discovery of this seem like a long time? Did any of our measurements be able to get this granular to say, geez, something's wrong with that meter, or is it?
So we do have our duration reads on this one. This is one of our Neptunes, but we have since arranged, I don't know if it's been put in yet, but we're actually putting even newer technology on this account so that the customer can set alarms to say, hey, if we go over this much, set a alarm here to say if we go over 5,000 in a day, I want to get an alarm or something like that. So we caught the high consumption during our quarterly or during our monthly read on this. But we also already communicated with them to exchange it out to even newer technology so that this can be caught within a couple of days' time, especially if they have alarms set up on their side.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All those in favor, signify by a sign of aye.
Aye.
All same sign, motion carries. Construction and maintenance report.
Yeah, sure. I really isn't there a whole lot of changes to the report from last month, a few minor ones, but and I have nothing to add to it. So if there's any questions, I can take those.
I've got a general question, and I'm not sure who to ask it of. Along 4th Avenue, past the university, past Quant Gym and that area, they're putting in some large diameter cast iron pipe. And I don't know if that's storm or sanitary or.
I think you're referring to the universities doing some upgrades on their steam system.
Oh, okay.
I think that's most likely what you're seeing there. Would that be about right, Joel?
They're doing a bunch of off right-of-way work this year, and then the city's going to be doing some in right-of-way work in 26 or 27 or both. But yeah, all the stuff you see there is not road related, and it will include some site drainage stuff, but also steam work, like Shane said.
Okay, thanks much.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? All right, go to item number 8, which is the update on the Park Ridge water infrastructure situation.
Yeah.
Joel, you
Wanted
want to start?
Yeah. What I'd like to do here is just give everybody an update on what was discussed at Plan Commission, if that's okay. And I'd even run through these slides real quick if you're okay with it.
Sure.
Okay. So at Plan Commission, basically what was introduced was the agreements that we have with the village already, just to bring everybody up to speed. And I'll just summarize those real quick. Each one of these bullets has a separate slide. So we've been in our wastewater agreement with them since 1956, and among other things, this just acknowledges that they wanted sewer collection pipe work done, and they didn't want to have to build a wastewater treatment plant. So at the time, they got into an agreement with the city proper because they took care of the mains at the time and the wastewater treatment plant. So it was kind of a three-way agreement. and made a 99-year term agreement. They bought into the infrastructure, and they've paid a 25% surcharge on their rates ever since. That's the cliff notes of that one. We do have a fire hydrant agreement for the one fire hydrant that exists in the village of Park Ridge. Basically says that they can use it for fire protection. They paid to have it put in, and so on and so forth. The fire department, since then, when the village ceased their volunteer fire department operation, they got into an agreement with our fire department, and the current agreement is signed from 22 and expires in about 2 months here. So that fire agreement is one of the main reasons the village was looking to get more fire hydrants inside the village limits. And then, of course, the two newest subdivision areas in Park Ridge, which are, if you turn north on Green Avenue off of Park Ridge Drive, which is Main Street, which is 66, which is former 10, on the west side of Green Avenue there's those two cul-de-sacs. Those are Odessa Court, which was constructed around 2006, and Angelo Court to the south of it, which was constructed in 2018. And basically what we did in those is adopted village ordinances that acknowledged all the conditions that we wanted acknowledged, to say the village owns these, they're theirs to repair, but they'll operate according to our governing policies for the most part, and that the hydrants there are private. And then finally, the city ordinance, chapter 13, water service limits. Right now, that area in white in the center is the extent of the parcels, if you will, although they're not recorded as parcels, it's addresses, which has actually complicated this over the years. Those are the places in Park Ridge currently allowed to have water. So this is part of the thing we're trying to amend to allow, or propose to allow more areas in the village to have water, because if they're going to put in fire hydrants, those mains should be able to serve domestic water too, because otherwise it's kind of a poor use of infrastructure. So here's the current infrastructure. The shaded red area is the municipal or corporate limits of the village. The green lines are sanitary sewers, and the blue lines are water. So they paid to install all these sewers and paid to construct a larger sewer that goes through the middle and up for our benefit to the north and east, but they did pay for those in the 50s. This one water main and these water mains on Main Street, all these water mains are ours, not theirs. So what they're proposing to do is, I just kind of grayed out the background so you could see clearly here. This darker blue line is where they'd like to install water main and fire hydrants along it to kind of further segment up the village and have more fire hydrants present. And then later phases would bring in this yellow network of mains to add to that. You can see the whole goal there is to really kind of evenly divide the village to get more even disbursement of hydrants. So then really what was proposed, as we discussed this at this commission maybe a year ago or so, that we don't have a supply issue or anything like that. So this really does become kind of a political decision. So that's why this went to the Plan Commission, and we'll go to council next week. There really are two options here. Option one just says, no, we're not going to allow the extension of any more water main for any purpose, whether that's fire hydrants or domestic. And option two says, yes, we will allow it with some conditions. And those conditions were changing chapter 13 to change the water service area to allow the people, more people to have access to that. And then what kind of points would go into an agreement between the city and the village. And as they were discussed here, they were also acted on as a recommendation to council from Plan Commission. So those bullet points are here. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but here under agreement language, that all infrastructure, roads, and utilities be built to city spec, and they've already agreed to that in concept. No more infrastructure beyond this phase until a consolidation agreement is discussed and in place. There's a lot, that's a open-ended item, but it is what it is to say, hey, we're going to discuss a consolidation agreement before to allow this phase right here, but before this phase would be allowed. And then that there's a trigger mechanism. Sorry?
What's a consolidation agreement?
Well, it's a term specific to the fact that a village and a city do not have annexation authority one way or the other. So if a village is ever going to become part of a city, it's done through one of just a couple mechanisms, and one of them is a consolidation agreement. So essentially, what we're saying is, hey, there's coming a point where there may need to be a discussion about how and if and when the village becomes part of the city of Stevens Point. And so those things we just wanted, or the plan commission suggested to council that we get those items out on the table before more infrastructure is allowed to be installed in the village past this phase, before we get to this phase.
Okay.
But that along with that in the agreement, these trigger mechanisms for connecting to the water be put in place. So if you're along this route, and we'll propose to add all the parcels that are adjacent to this route to the Chapter 13 ordinance that is the water service limits. Basically, anybody along that route, all non-conforming wells would have to connect to the water basically immediately. And, you know, those exist everywhere. Everywhere you have wells, some of them are non-conforming, so there's no real surprise there. It's just kind of the way it is. No new construction of wells. So if you're along that route and your well goes bad, you connect to city water. And then all wells along that line within a period of time. This is what was proposed, was 10 years. And that's more or less how the minutes read. I'll go to the minutes of that meeting. Here's the motion by Mayor Wiesa to recommend amendment of Chapter 13. And basically spells out everything that was on that slide. So just wanted to bring you up to speed on that. Certainly I will inform, this item does allow for, you know, we have discussion possible action on and it's an update, but I can certainly relay any concerns or comments you guys have, but more importantly, I wanted to relay to you what the plan commission's action was, and which is outlined right here in this text, which is commensurate with what was in the slides. So that's where we're at the moment. We'll take an ordinance amendment to council along with some thoughts on a draft agreement as soon as next week.
So Joel, did I understand you to say that this consolidation agreement that you referred to would probably be out as long as 10 years before it would be considered?
Yeah, the term of the agreement isn't anything that was discussed. There are a few things that could make sense. One of them, the village's tax rate is probably going to intersect with ours before too long. You know, they're pretty close already. The other thing is that even though that was a 99-year agreement, 1956 to 2055, you know, we're 30 years out right now. So, I mean, we're 2/3 of the way through that. And then there's other things like more infrastructure requests. So it's really about getting the conversation on the table to say, hey, you know, there are some folks that believe that they shouldn't have access to any of our infrastructure without annexing, but you don't just simply annex parcels in a village. And we've been doing this with them for several decades already. So it's just a balance and interest to say we're going to discuss a consolidation agreement before improvements beyond this phase are allowed. And what comes of that consolidation agreement is yet to be seen, but that it needs to kind of be discussed or in place or one or the other.
Well, my information suggests that the village mill rate per thousand right now is $16.72 compared with Stevens Point at $25.14. That's not starting to get close.
No, however, they're only at about a 65% ratio, so they're due for a reval. And so as those things get done, my understanding from offices in City Hall and the assessor's office is that those things will start to intercept each other sooner than might be obvious. Plus, if they continue on with their infrastructure improvements, now they do have two rather large grants to cover these two phases. But after that, you know, they have a lot of road work to do there, and a little bit of borrowing in that village could increase their levy pretty quick. And I think that's what we're looking at. And so one of the real interests, I wouldn't say is necessarily planning on how we're going to get the village to be part of the city, but rather, if we need to give consideration to that in the future, making sure that we take what action we can now to ensure they're building their infrastructure to city standards, so that if and when in the future the option becomes obvious that we need to say, hey, yes or no, that they've got some newer, better built infrastructure in place so that the city doesn't take on the liability of the kind of roads they have right now, which are, overall substandard to the cities.
So the rest of you know, Joel and I just have a fundamental disagreement on this issue. From way back when I was the finance director for the city for those 2.5 years, I learned a lot about annexation and services and those sorts of things. And Joel says that this is good for the Water Commission and that's why we should do it. And I say, well, it's not about that. It's about the difference in taxes, and that why should Stevens Point residents essentially be subsidizing the village of Park Ridge by having that kind of a difference between their taxes. I heard your arguments about how they're going to get closer, but I don't understand why we wouldn't just do it now instead of waiting for this agreement.
Well, so that really was the back and forth, right? They've got some grant money to be able to do this stuff, and really, I don't think fundamentally there's a huge gap there. The difference is that if they want fire hydrants in there because they're using our fire department as a firefighting mechanism, it's really poor infrastructure planning to put water main in the ground at over $100 a foot and just use it for fire hydrants and not allow it to be used for domestic water. At that point, I would say that from a utility perspective, we shouldn't allow it, because we're going to have to take that infrastructure, because they can't connect to our drinking water system as a municipality where it flows through. The dead ends are a different issue, but a through system, we can't take that on as somebody else's infrastructure, so it has to be ours. So in the interest of supporting what I understand to be a good thing, that is the fire department saying we would like, if we're going to have a long-term relationship here, we'd like more fire hydrants there. So if we're going to put ourselves in a position to support that, which we should, because fire protection and domestic drinking water, commercial, industrial, and public authority water supply, that's really our mission, right? Then what I'm saying is that those mains aren't of interest to us operationally if there's no customers on them to support them. And a few fire hydrants sitting on some really expensive main does not financially support the infrastructure in the ground that'll need replacing in 80 to 100 years. So having a triggering mechanism to get people on that helps support the financial viability of that, whereas just using it for fire protection doesn't. Which is why, if you go back to these options, option one is really no water main, and that's an acceptable option. That isn't the way it went at Plan Commission, but option two sets the table to bring some clarity to this. And if we were pre-1956 right now, and we were currently debating whether or not to allow them to put in a collection system of sewers that would ultimately be treated at our wastewater treatment plant, I think that option one would be more obvious. But given that they've got sewers through the entire village for every property in town, this slow addition of water to our spec and our standard, and saying these customers are going to come online, at least lets the utility be whole in the way of customers. And there's no impact to the folks from a levy side. None of the tax base of the city goes towards this infrastructure. So they pay more on sewer, they'll pay the same on water. So from a customer perspective, it's all the same. There's really not a very meaningful connection as to who's our out-of-town customers versus in-town, because we don't take tax money from either resident in town or out of town. They're just ratepayers.
Any other comments or questions?
And the rate structure, does that include the assessment for stormwater?
No, they wouldn't be stormwater customers because of the fact that they're not in the city, and because they're not in the city, they're not included in what's called our MS4 boundary. So not being in our MS4, we can't charge them for stormwater.
So as I see it, we have to make the decision as to whether we want to approve this without an annexation now with hopes, that's probably a pretty nice word, hope, that there will be an annexation somewhere in the next 10 years after we do the other phases of the project.
Well, to not complicate it, and I mean, feel free to complicate it, but I would either speak to supporting the Plan Commission's recommendation, which was essentially here and it was in the minutes, or to recommend to council something different.
I think.
And the Plan Commission's, just so we're clear, the Plan Commission's recommendation does say this will be allowed, and to modify Chapter 13 to allow it, but that before anything else, like this or a different version of it is allowed, that we will have a consolidation agreement. So it lets them take care of some grant funding, or take advantage of some grant funding, but also says that's it until we know how we're combining. The timeline of that consolidation agreement was not specified in the action, but I think that it could be quicker because I believe that phase 2 of this, I think their money is slated under 10 years. I think it's probably 5 or so. So just by way of the grants they've received and they're seeking out, I think that'll take care of the timeline.
Joel, define for me the difference in the definition of consolidation agreement versus annexation.
It's words really. See, we can't do like voluntary annexation or anything like that of a parcel in Park Ridge to the city of Stevens Point. By the way, I understand it. It's as though these are two cities next to each other. When it's city next to a town, then you can do unanimous consent for annexation. It doesn't work the same with a village in a city because they're in the plane of annexation. I believe they're equal. And so, but the two communities can agree to consolidate. And that does take, I believe, a referendum on part of both of them. And there is even some supermajority vote for boards and councils and stuff like that. So, yeah, it's just a way of annexing, if you will, through the statutes that call it consolidation rather than annexation. Annexation, I think, generally carries with it a cue of this is not optional. Like we're doing this without your consent sometimes. Consolidation implies there's two willing parties at the table.
But if there's going to be a referendum, I don't see any way that the village, if their taxes stay significantly lower than Stevens Point, that the village residents are going to agree to a referendum to agreement like that.
And in that case, then there's no more infrastructure. Then we are where we are, and it just stays there. However, there are a number of things that when you look at, and we've done some real preliminary kind of analysis of it all. When you look at the fact that they pay 25% more for their wastewater, and they have been for several decades, that, you know, while it's through their taxes, they do pay a little more for fire protection than a city resident does. That they have to contract out their, you know, snow removal from places that are well away from here, that their garbage. So you put all these things together, and mill rate isn't the only thing that, you know, contributes to the total cost of service in the city versus the village. And so I think after the revaluation and then after a little more analysis, my understanding is, and I didn't perform the analysis, but it's closer than what it would appear right now. And then if they get into any more infrastructure improvement in the way of reconstructing roads or anything, because of the size of the village not being very big and the cost of those projects, that capital and the required borrowing and the required mill rate increase for borrowing for those is gonna put them on a pretty quick increase in their mill rate. But again, that's an analysis that they're kind of doing on the city hall side of things. And kind of regardless of all that, if the grants that they want to take advantage of that follow phase one, so the phase two stuff that's more like this yellow, if those require consolidation agreement to be in place, well, then they do, you know? And so they'll have to come to terms with that and either not use those grant funds to put that infrastructure in place, or come to the table and have an agreement where we have a timeline for when they do consolidate with the city or annex, if you will. And if that's the case, then it's the city's benefit that they take advantage of those funds, put in the new infrastructure, and that there's better infrastructure in place if and when they become part of the city, so that those are assets and not liabilities, really.
Well, I came to this meeting with the understanding for myself that I was going to vote no for the first time on something that staff recommended in favor of after 35 years. But if you say to me, Paul, we should do this now to make our fire department happy about making sure they have the water that they need to provide the service that they want, I'd have a hard time arguing about that. And I didn't know anything about this contract that I keep forgetting the name of, agreement, consolidation agreement.
Yeah.
But it sounds like sometime in the next 10 years, before we would go on and put in those yellow lines, that there'd be an increase in their bill rate, which would make it more likely that the residents might agree to vote for annexation.
Yeah,
Is that what you want to say to me?
Yeah, that's perfectly accurate. Not only that, but I'd like to be in a position as the city to have seen good infrastructure replacement for a period of time at their expense rather than ours before any consolidation is considered. Because like I said, overall, the roads and everything are in worse shape than ours. So we'd be taking on quite a bit of infrastructure replacement at that time. So if they can put that money into infrastructure, and that doesn't even mean that it has to happen yet, but it'll put us in a better position to say, yes, this is a good decision down the road if and when consolidation comes up and they come into the city. They'll be closer to kind of an average condition of the city.
Carl? Yeah, I was just curious about the sources of these grants. Are these state grants? Are they federal grants, infrastructure money? You said we don't know if, when they sunset, but.
No. So
and
the
what
first round, is not one of them is I think BIL and the other is LRIP, Local Road Improvement Program through the DOT, LRIP dollars and BIL money. There's two separate ones. One's for about 420,000, I think, and the other is slightly more, I believe. But then the stuff they have in place for it's like 27 to 29, I believe the year span is. I'm not sure if it's the same grant pools or not. I just know the current ones are LRIP and I think BIL.
Do you know what percentage of cost sharing that is? Is that an 80% grant or 50-50?
One is 80% and I think the other's 50-50. I can't swear to that, but none of this is so. I mean, the beauty of it is that it's 0% city or utilities, right? I mean, they're paying every penny of it, and that's what's required. And that's why, if there is going to be consolidation in the future, that's why it's beneficial now because it's not out of our ratepayers' pockets or our taxpayers' pockets. They're putting infrastructure in that if we're going to consolidate, it's better that it's put in now so that we don't have to pay for it in the future.
Well, it's, these grant funds represent a leverage in themselves. They either get to lower their bill for installing some pretty expensive infrastructure, or they, I would assume the grants disappear. And that might be particularly with the language here, before we would accept the phase two, they'd have to have a consolidation agreement, and this might nudge them quicker than, otherwise it'll be 30 years. And their roads probably won't be done in the next 30 years anyway, looking at the rate that they're doing it.
And this, you put the blue and the yellow together, and it's a healthy percentage of the roads that exist there in relatively short order. So there really are two trains of thought here, and they're neither one's inappropriate. Either we say no, which was option one, or we say yes with conditions. And the yes with conditions gets more infrastructure put in the ground, so that if we do say, like you said, without the yes, we'd be looking at 30 years here. But since the plan commission voted to say yes, that means phase one is allowed, phase two is not until there's a consolidation agreement. If they want to leverage those funds, they're going to have a consolidation agreement. So I think it speaks to everybody's interest here, and also speaks to leveraging dollars that are available with zero exposure to the city, whether that's taxpayers or ratepayers, to get some of that in the ground.
Well, I've changed my mind. I'll support a motion to approve this with the understanding that that bullet point regarding no more infrastructure beyond phase one until a consolidation agreement is in place is part of the arrangement. The argument for the fire department, the argument for them paying for what the city would otherwise have to pay for road construction, if there was annexation, both allowed me to change my mind. So, any other questions? Now I need a motion to basically approve what the plan commission has approved.
So moved.
I'll second.
Further discussion? Can't believe I'm doing this. All those in favor signify by the sign of aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Director Lemke, do you have a further report?
No, not really. I just wanted to bring one thing to your attention. Chris gave you an update on the UV project, and probably worth us mentioning that as projects are happening right now, with the back and forth and relative uncertainty as to the tariffs at our borders, there are some of our suppliers asking questions about how, or we're communicating on how to proceed if schedules aren't kept to. So I just wanted to alert you that there may be cause for a special meeting between now and next month because of some very sensitive timelines we're under with permits at wastewater. If there's any more last minute changes in tariffs to the Canadian border, we have some parts coming from them currently. So it's just a FYI, nothing scheduled yet. We're on track to meet that schedule if April 3rd is the date when those tariffs go into place. But if something happens between now and then, Chris and I will be requesting a special meeting to change the scope of an order slightly. So just an FYI.
Motion to adjourn is in order.
I'll move to adjourn.
All those in favor signify by the sign of aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion carried.
A video of this meeting is available for viewing on the city's website, stevenspoint.com/videos.